Travel ban breakthrough. Thousands of immigrants are back in the U.S. after a federal judge blocks President Trump's executive order banning people from 7 predominantly Muslim countries from entering the U.S. The latest on this rapidly evolving issue. Hello, everyone. I'm Jason Newton, and welcome to this special edition of 11 TV Hill. And breaking overnight, federal appeals court is denying the Justice Department's request for an immediate reinstatement of President Trump's travel ban. Late last night, the Trump administration appealed a temporary order restraining that ban nationwide. Meanwhile, the protests across the country continuing this weekend, with thousands of people taking to the streets demanding a permanent end to that immigration executive order. We get the latest from Chris Pollone.
In cities like Washington, Miami, and New York, protesters took to the streets again Saturday, pushing a pro-immigration message, urging the Trump administration to drop its executive order barring people from 7 majority Muslim countries from coming to the U.S.
Everyone deserves to come here for a new life. Refugees, Syrians, Libyans, Yemeni, it doesn't matter who you are or where you come from.
The protesters encouraged by a Seattle federal judge's ruling late Friday, which puts the travel ban on hold for now.
I find that a temporary restraining order is in the public interest.
The law is a powerful thing. It has the ability to hold everybody accountable to it, and that includes the President of the United States.
President Donald Trump not impressed. In a video recorded before the court ruling, he defended his executive order.
The executive order establishes a process to develop new vetting and mechanisms to ensure those coming into America love and support our people, that they have good intention.
Trump tweeting Saturday morning he believes the ruling is ridiculous, and he predicts that it will be overturned. But until that happens, about 60,000 people who had their visas revoked last week and people from the 7 banned countries are now free to come to the U.S. All federal agencies are complying with the court order. If they do come, however, it will be at their own peril. With constant legal maneuvering going on, their status could change at any moment.
Chris Pollone, WBAL TV 11 News.
Chris, thanks. Meanwhile, protesters held a rally outside of a luxury condo building owned and built by President Donald Trump in West Palm Beach, Florida. About 1,000 people gathered outside the Trump Plaza condo where they chanted and held signs regarding, quote, the death of democracy. Now, that group then marched about 2 miles to President Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort where he is staying this weekend. Those protests were not confined just to the U.S. Worldwide demonstrations against President Trump's now blocked executive order took place in London, Australia, and as far away as Hong Kong. Protesters also gathered in other parts of the world as well. Now, the president had a lot to say about Friday's ruling in a series of tweets, even lashing out against the judge who made that ruling. The opinion, he says, of this so-called judge, which essentially takes law enforcement away from the country, is ridiculous and will be overturned. In another tweet, he says, when a country is no longer able to say who can and who cannot come in and out, especially for reasons of safety and security, big trouble. Earlier today on NBC's Meet the Press, Vice President Mike Pence expressed his concern about Friday's ruling and pushed back on the notion that this order should be rescinded.
From the outset of his campaign for president and the outset of this administration, President Trump has made it clear he's going to put the safety and security of the American people first, and using a list of countries that the Obama administration and the Congress have certified were compromised by terrorist influence. 7 different countries permanently suspending immigration from Syria and suspending for a set period of time the remaining 6 countries is consistent with the president's commitment to do just that. We're very confident the president's operating within his authority as president, both under the Constitution and under clear statutory law.
The vice president called the judge's ruling, quote, frustrating, and he also insisted that that order is not a religious ban. And opponents of the ruling say that this stops President Trump from making our country safer.
We need to address what we have in our country first, and I think it's necessary. It's dangerous for Americans, and we want to feel safe in our own home.
Maryland Senior Senator Ben Cardin voicing support for the judge's ruling to block that immigration ban. In a statement, Cardin said in part, quote, "The international chaos caused by the rushed and ill-conceived executive order targeting Muslim refugees and travelers is wrong and should be rescinded. This executive order has made America less safe." That's coming from Senator Cardin. Also here in Baltimore, a large group marched through the streets Saturday speaking out against President Trump's travel and refugee ban. Police escorted dozens of people who held signs in support of refugees and immigrants. They called the demonstration a march for tolerance. Now, one local group is demanding a stance from Governor Larry Hogan. CASA, a Latino immigration advocacy group, held a rally in Annapolis on Saturday, hoping to send a message to the governor. Hundreds attended that rally in the state's capital. They say they want the governor's support for immigrants. The governor has said that his office is reviewing the implications of the president's travel ban for the state of Maryland. In a statement, a spokesperson for Governor Hogan said the administration has and continues to support and strengthen a more clarified vetting process for those entering our country. Improving our national security can and should be done in a defined and concise manner that upholds our American values. That comes from the governor's office. Joining us now, Dr. Zainab Chowdhury. She's with the Council of American and Islamic Relations, the nation's largest Muslim and civil rights group. Thank you for coming by.
Thank you so much for having me. I
appreciate it. Certainly. And also we should note that we mentioned that we invited members from the state Republican Party to join us as well. We did not get a response. First, let's talk about the discussion within CARE over the last 48 hours. I'm sure the discussion has changed a little bit.
This has been a very fluid, very rapidly evolving situation. We've been seeing over the course of the last couple of weeks, or last week really, when the executive order was first signed, that there have been a lot of decisions that have been made at all levels of the government that have really, I think, helped send a message that, there are a lot of different agencies within the government that are struggling to understand what the current situation is right now regarding the executive order. So it's a rapidly evolving situation, and we're trying to make sure that we are staying abreast of it and doing everything we can to help empower and educate our communities.
Tell me what you think of what's coming out of the White House and supporters of the travel ban, saying that much of the discussion is this is a temporary ban. It gives us time to reassess how we do immigration. It has a definite end. We'll find out where the holes are, patch them up, and fix it. What do you think of that?
Any kind of executive order, any kind of policy or legislation, I think that unfairly discriminates or targets any minority, regardless of their race, religion, or what have you, I think does not keep our country safe. I think it undermines some of the core values of our democracy. It is antithetical to the values that our country was founded upon. America was founded by settlers who are pilgrims who arrived at the United States fleeing religious persecution. And I think this particular executive order, specifically targeting Muslim majority countries that bans refugees and immigrants who, for the most part, or if not all of them, are Muslims who are going to be targeted. I think it sends a clear message to not only American Muslims, but Muslims around the world that this is definitely specifically something that targets Muslims. We know during the election campaign season, Mr. Trump said specifically that he was going to support a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. And this kind of legislation, I think, clearly sends a message that he plans to at least attempt to live up to that campaign promise. But fortunately, we have a government that's operated by a system of checks and balances. And I think that especially the Ninth Circuit Court's decision that came last night is an indicator of that checks and balances that we're seeing in play.
We heard from Paul Ryan early on, and part of what he's saying is that the message was right, but the way that it was brought forth was wrong. We have a soundbite from him. Just take a listen, because I want to see what you think. Here's Paul Ryan.
I think it's regrettable that there was some confusion on the rollout of this. No one wanted to see people with green cards or special immigrant visas like translators get caught up in all of this. And so I think regrettably, the rollout was confusing, but on a go-forward basis, I'm confident that Secretary Kelly is going to make sure that this is done correctly, that they get a good review, and that we are going to make sure that we get this program up and running with the kind of vetting standards that we all want to see.
Sounds like from him the program is right, but the way that it was laid upon the American people was not. What do you think?
It's been disturbing to see the change in tone from Speaker Ryan. If we look at some of the tweets that he posted on social media even a year ago, he clearly was against any kind of legislation or policy that would religiously discriminate people on the basis of their religion. And now it seems like he's changed his tune. I think that he's particularly referring to the fact that there are probably there should have been allowances made for the fact that there were people traveling in transit at the time that the ban was made, at the time that the order was signed. But I think that policy itself is flawed. I think that studies show, if we look at the statistics, if we look at the data, our country is strengthened by refugees and by immigrants. Refugees do not pose a national security threat. Since 9/11, we have had hundreds of thousands of refugees who have been settled in the United States. The vast majority of them that have been from Muslim majority countries have been law-abiding citizens. We have not received any reports of any refugees who have been settled in the United States from any of the 7 countries that are listed in the executive order who have been incriminated in any kind of terrorist activity or any kind of attack. So I think that we have to make sure that we develop policies that are sound, that are strategic, that do not undermine the rights of any Americans or any potential Americans, any potential refugees or immigrants who would be arriving to the United States based on religion or race.
Can these two sides find a way to agree on this, where we are not infringing on people's rights, but also keeping the border safe? Will there ever be a happy medium as far as care is concerned?
You know, right now our country is very divided, and I think that the conversation that we're hearing on the national level is an indicator of that division. But we have to stay optimistic. I mean, I think if we are committed to the core values that help define our country and that help contribute to a holistic democracy, including religious pluralism, protecting religious pluralism, then I think that we stand a better chance of having a stronger nation, of not providing more ammunition to terrorist organizations that would capitalize on this kind of policy to help recruit more terrorists to their ranks. I mean, this is actually, in effect, this kind of policy, it undermines our national security because it allows organizations like ISIS to say, look, see, the West is at war with Islam. This is why you should come support us. And that does not keep our country safer. It makes it more vulnerable.
About 30 seconds. What's the message from CARE today?
You know, we are committed to making sure that no American and no individual who has a dream of fulfilling or who dreams of arriving to the United States is ever discriminated against on the basis of religion. The idea that anybody would be banned from any country, especially our country, because they're Muslim is antithetical to what we stand for as Muslims and as Americans. And we're committed to making sure that we push back against it. Our organization filed a lawsuit challenging the ban on constitutional grounds, and we were very pleased by the decision from the Ninth Circuit Court, and we're hoping to hoping to build on that momentum and see this ban be taken down once and for all.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.